Hi, and welcome back again with IGCSE Business Studies. Today, we are going to start with Chapter 2, Section 1, and we are going to learn about the classification of business. In this chapter, we are going to learn the primary, secondary, and tertiary sector business activities, the changing importance of the classification of business activity by sector for developing and developed economies, and finally how business enterprise are classified in the private sector and in the public sector. So okay guys, let's start our lesson today. Okay, let's go. Guys, let me remind you to follow me. By opening your book. Page 20. So let's read the introduction of the classification of business. In the last chapter, as you know, in the first chapter when we talked about the wants and the needs and so on and about the business activities, you looked at the purpose of business activity. In this chapter, you are going to learn how business activity can be used to classify the business in economy, and why it's important to classify the business. Let me remind you guys that there is the main importance information in this chapter is what I'm going to say now. The three sectors in business is primary sector. What you have to know, primary sector, we have three main sector in business: primary sector, secondary sector, and finally tertiary sectors. And we are going to learn in this chapter what is the primary sector, an example of primary sector, and how to classify the business into the main three business sectors. So this is what we are going to learn at this chapter. So let's start, guys, with the first type of business sectors is the primary sector. The primary sector, guys, when you just read something or hear something about the primary sector, just think about the resources, the nature resources like water, like gas, everything comes from the earth or from the land. So the primary sector, guys, is, let's say, it's a business activities involve extracting or harvesting natural resources from the land or the sea. These include agricultural products such as rice, fish, wood, coal, and oil. For example, of primary sector, maybe farming, fishing, forestry, mining. This is all the primary sector type. So the primary sector is, we are talking now about resources, as we say, that coming from the land or from the sea. This is the primary sector. So the primary sector is, we can say here, as you see here, this is the primary sector, as we see here. It is firms whose business activity involves the extraction of natural resources. So this is the primary sector. Okay. This is the, for example, farming, fishing, forestry, mining. This is the primary sector's example. So the primary sector business activity often provides raw materials for secondary sector's business activities. An example is the extraction of oil, which used to produce petrol or plastic. However, some primary sectors business activity produces final products. For example, consumer can buy raw materials or raw vegetables, fruits, and fish. This is an example. Make a list of the primary sector's business activities found in your country, including the natural resources they produce. In Jordan, maybe the primary sector farming a little bit. No fishing, we don't have sea unless in Aqaba. Forestry, mining, we have in oil stones, we don't have petrol or oil. This is the primary sector in my country, Jordan. We have mining, like phosphate and whatever. We have a little bit farming. Okay, so let's go, guys, directly to the second type of business activities sectors is the secondary sectors. The secondary sectors is just receive the goods or the materials, raw materials from the primary sectors and make it for goods or services. So let's see here. So this is the second type of secondary sector, the second type of business activity. The secondary sector is firms that process and manufactures goods from the natural resources. So it uses the natural resources that come from the primary sector. So the secondary sector is come in the middle. So primary sector, secondary sector, and tertiary sectors. Okay? So the secondary sector is the firms that process and manufacture goods from natural resources, from primary sector. Okay? So the secondary sector business activity takes the natural resources. We takes the oil from the inside the land and we produce as petrol, as plastic, and so on. We take for example, the mining materials from the land and we make it another example of products. So this is the secondary sector. In brief, secondary sector business activity takes the natural resources produced by primary sector activity and turns these raw materials into finished goods. The activities of secondary sector include refining, manufacturing, construction. So we have refining, manufacturing, and construction. This is an example of the secondary sector business activity include foods canning, fruits making, car manufacturing, and house building. Okay. So, as you see in this picture, it's a car manufacturing plants. It's take the metal as a raw material and other materials from the primary sectors and manufacturing cars. Make a list of secondary sector business activities found in your country. We have so manufacturing products in my country. Not a car for sure, but another thing for foods, for let's say for another thing. And we have a good construction sector in my country, housing companies that builds houses using the construction and so on. So let's go, guys, to the third and the last part of the business activities type of sectors. It's a territory sectors. What is the territory sectors? It's a firms that supply a service to consumer and other business. So it's a firm that supplies services to consumers and other business. Business activity involves providing service to the final consumer or business. Example of territory sector business include let's say shops like the malls, we have restaurants, banks, cinemas, airlines, maybe you can say hotels, and so on. So all these is a territory sectors. It's providing services. It's providing services to the consumer and other business. Maybe for the consumers, maybe for the other business. This is the territory sectors, and it's in very important sectors. In some countries, they depend maybe more than 90% on these sectors. Some countries depends on the secondary sectors. Some countries depend on their economy, for sure, on the primary sector. It depends on the nature of the country. Okay, in my country, Jordan, they depend, I think, 20% on the primary, and maybe more than, I think, 50% or 60% on the tertiary sectors, and the other for the secondary sectors. I think you should review my information. Okay, so these businesses provide service such as retailing, finance, entertainment, and transport. Like we see here, the restaurants. Make a list of tertiary sectors business activities found in your country. We are a tourism country, as you know, so we provide services for the tourism tourist peoples that visit Jordan. It's like hotels. We have nice hotels, 5-star hotels. We have it provides services for the Jordanian visitors. We have also restaurants and international restaurants, brand name restaurants. We have also cinemas here. We have big malls. So all these territory sectors in Jordan is very important. So let's say now, guys, how the sectors depend on each other. Let's see here. Although an economy can be divided into primary, secondary, and tertiary sectors, okay? So the different sectors of business activity are often depend on each other. This is known as a chain of production. So the chain of production is the production and supply of goods to the final consumer involves activities from primary, secondary, and tertiary sectors business. Okay? So let's look at oil, for example. Oil is extracted from underground and is a business activity of the primary sectors. Once it has been extracted, oil needs to be refined to produce other products such as petrol or gas. This is a process carried out by business in the secondary sector. Finally, tertiary sector's activity is needed to bring the petrol to your nearest petrol or gas station for sale to the final consumer. As you see here, this is the drilling of oil primary sectors from the land, and this is the refining. This is the refining process of the oil in the secondary sector, and finally this is the petrol or gas station that will be sold to the consumer. Okay, this is in the primary, this is in the secondary, this is in the tertiary sector. Okay, this is an example. All these sectors depend on each other. Secondary sector is dependent on primary. Tertiary is dependent on the secondary. Okay? So this is the relation between these three types. So, a change in a business behavior resulting from the need for finance to find expansion so that business can compete in global markets, the need to be able to communicate internally and externally quickly as cheap as possible to take advantage of the opportunity of wider markets, and finally the need to provide better service for their employees, for example, canteen. This turns increased business demand for the goods and services of other business. Let's test ourselves, guys, in this example and see here. Give one example of a primary, secondary, and tertiary sector business activity. Okay, let's say, guys, for the primary, the oil from that comes from inside the land, maybe the fish from the sea or anything from the sea. All these type of items or materials of a product is an example of primary. Okay. The secondary, maybe secondary type of secondary sector business activities. It's like, as we see here, the refining for the petroleum. As we see here, this is the refining, the oil in the secondary sectors. Maybe manufacturing cars, as we see here, manufacturing cars. This is in the secondary sector. And finally, let's see the type of tertiary sectors, the hotels that provide services for the consumer, the restaurant, and all these tertiary sectors business activities. Maybe hotels, restaurant, and malls, big shops, and so on. Number 2, explain the difference between the primary sector and tertiary sectors business activity. Okay, the primary sectors is a raw materials. It is not processed. It is not analyzed. So the primary sectors is just a raw materials that, as we say, it comes from the land, from the sea, and whatever. It's a raw materials. It's a raw materials without any human being interference. Okay, this is the primary sector. The tertiary sectors is the final, or it is the service that will be provided to the consumer or to another business. It's the final products edition. It's the final products edition. It's you can say it's a service. It is not a product. The tertiary sector, it is not a product. It's just a service, like the service that are provided by the hotels, the services that are provided by cinemas when we watch a movie, the services that are provided by the restaurant, any services, the internet services, any services that are provided by another business is a tertiary business. Okay. 3. What meant by secondary sector business activities? Secondary sector, as we say here, secondary is firms that process and manufactures goods from natural resources. So the secondary business is just take what's produced from the primary and manufactured, then converted to the tertiary sectors, okay, or to the last or the final edition. 4. Using an example, explain the relationship between business activities in the primary, secondary, and tertiary. Okay, as we see here, the pictures is explain the relationship. The primary sectors, for example, in the is drilling for oil primary sectors. It's taking the raw materials in oil from inside the earth. This is then it will transfer to the secondary sector. Here we refining the oil in the secondary sector to provide petrol, to provide plastic or another petroleum, let's say, classifications, products or items. And finally, here are the tertiary sectors is petrol or gas station. It will be sold to the consumer or to the customers. Okay, so this is the relations between the three. This is the relations between the three business activities: the primary, secondary, and tertiary. The last question 5: how might the classifications of business activity by sector be used to tell the difference between developing and developed economy? As we say in the beginning of our class today, that each country economy we are talking now about economy, is depend in percentage value on one of these three business sectors. So in some countries they depend, for example, 50% on let's say primary, and 20% for the secondary, and 30% on the tertiary. In other country, for example, in the industrial country like Japan or whatever, they depend about 70% on the secondary, maybe 10% on the primary, and maybe 20% on the tertiary. It's depend on the nature of the country. So this is how might the classification of business activity by sectors be used to tell the difference between developing and developed economy. So the economy is depends or it's related to the nature of business or related to the nature of the country. Okay, I hope you benefited from our lessons today. Let me remind you guys that you're able to ask any question at any time by contacting me directly and ask your question. Take care of yourself and your families, and goodbye.